By the time my parents finally sat me down at 24 and said, "You were just adopted. We did our duty, but you're not really ours," it was supposed to explain everything. The distance, the favoritism, why I was left out of the will. Instead, it did the opposite. Something in their story was wrong. By the time my parents sat me down and told me I was just adopted, I already knew I didn't really belong in that house. I didn't have the words for it when I was a kid. Back then, it was just a tightness in my chest at the dinner table, the way my fork scraped alone on the plate while everyone else laughed at a joke I somehow wasn't part of. It was the way my mother's eyes softened when she looked at my younger brother Ethan, and hardened by a fraction when they slid over to me. I'm Daniel Marshall, 33 years old now. Back then I was just Danny, the serious one, the sensitive one, the one who wasn't like the rest of us, according to my dad. He always said it with a chuckle, as if it were a harmless observation. But even when I was 8, sitting there with my feet barely touching the floor, I could feel the distance packed into that sentence. We grew up in a small town in Ohio, in a pale yellow house with peeling paint and a maple tree in the front yard. From the outside, we looked like any other middle-class family. 2 parents, 2 kids, a golden retriever named Max. My mom, Linda, worked as a nurse. My dad, Gary, ran a small construction business he'd inherited from his father. Ethan was the golden boy from the day he was born. There's a family photo my aunt took on the day they brought Ethan home from the hospital. I'm 4, holding a crooked welcome baby sign I colored myself. Dad has one arm around Mom's shoulders and the other under Ethan. Ethan is red-faced and squinting. Mom is staring at him like he hung the moon. If you look closely, if you know what you're looking for, you can see me on the edge of the frame, the sign half covering my face. That's how most of my childhood felt, half in the frame, half out. Birthdays were the easiest place to see it. On Ethan's 8th birthday, Dad rented one of those inflatable castles for the backyard. There were 30 kids running around, a magician, a custom dinosaur cake that probably cost more than my mom's monthly car payment. When the magician asked for a volunteer, my parents shouted "Ethan" before any of the other kids' hands even went up. The whole day felt like a small-town festival dedicated to him. My 10th birthday, we had store-brand cake at the kitchen table. No balloons, no friends, just my parents, Ethan, and a single candle. When I asked about inviting my classmates, Mom sighed and said, "We did a big thing for Ethan this year, honey. We can't do that every time. You understand, don't you? You're our responsible one." I nodded because that's what I did. I swallowed the lump in my throat, poked at the waxed frosting, and told myself it didn't matter. I was the responsible one. I was supposed to understand. That became my role, the one who understood. I understood when Ethan got the better bike because he's more outdoorsy, and I got the used one from a yard sale. I understood when he got private basketball coaching, and I was told we couldn't afford piano lessons. I understood when my straight A report cards were met with a distracted, "Good job, buddy," while Ethan's C+ in math earned him a full breakdown study plan and Dad at the table with him every night. Whenever I tried to talk about it, the conversation spun right back at me. "Why are you so negative, Daniel? Can't you just be happy for your brother? Not everything is about you." So I stopped talking. I learned to carry my questions inside my own head. There were moments, though, when the mask slipped and the truth came out in ways they never meant. Once when I was 11, I overheard my parents arguing in the kitchen after they thought we'd gone to bed. I was pouring a glass of water in the dark and the hallway air felt thick with tension. "You're too hard on him," Mom hissed. "He's just a kid." "He's not like Ethan," Dad said, his voice low but hard. "Ethan is ours. He fits. Daniel's always been different. You know that." My fingers went limp around the glass. Water sloshed over my hand and onto the counter. I froze, barely breathing, waiting for Mom to protest. To say, of course, Daniel is ours. To say, don't talk about our son that way. There was a long pause. A chair scraped on the tile. When Mom finally spoke, her voice was thin and tired. "We agreed we wouldn't." "That was your idea," Dad cut in. "I went along with it, but don't ask me to pretend he's the same as Ethan. He isn't. You can see it." The refrigerator hummed louder than usual. My heart hammered in my ears. I backed away, the glass still full, my hand cold and wet, and climbed back to my room in the dark. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, that one phrase replaying in my head like a scratched CD. He's not like Ethan. He doesn't fit. At 11, with no other information, my brain did what kids' brains always do. It told me it was my fault, that there was something wrong with me, something in my DNA that made me unlovable. Over the years, little things fed that suspicion. Relatives would say, Ethan looks just like Gary did at that age, or he's got Linda's smile. Then they'd look at me, hesitate, and say something vague like, "You've really got your own look, don't you, Daniel?" with an awkward laugh. At Thanksgiving, Aunt Carol once said, "He must take after some distant relative we never met," and the whole table laughed. I laughed too, even as my stomach turned. I looked nothing like my parents, that much was clear. They were both fair, light-eyed, with small noses and round faces. I had darker hair, darker eyes, a sharper jawline, and broader shoulders. Ethan looked like a perfect blend of the two of them. Standing next to him in family photos felt like standing next to a corrected version of myself. When I hit 16, any illusions I had left started to crumble. That was the year Ethan turned 12, and my parents decided he should join the family business. They took him to the construction sites on weekends, had him shadow Dad at meetings, even let him sit in when the bank manager came by. "We want him to start learning early," Dad would say with pride. "One day all this will be his." He never said that part quietly. He wanted me to hear it. One Saturday morning, I was at the kitchen table doing homework while Dad poured himself coffee. The newspaper lay folded beside him. An article about a local development project he just won was on the front page. "Do you think I could come to one of the sites sometime?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I mean, I am older. Maybe I could help out too." He didn't even look up from the mug. "We need you to focus on school," he said. "College applications aren't going to fill themselves out. Ethan's more hands-on. This stuff is in his blood." In his blood. The phrase lodged under my ribs like a splinter. That afternoon, Ethan ran in covered in dust and stories about excavators. I listened, smiled where I was supposed to, and swallowed that splinter deeper. A few months later, something happened that should have been a small thing, but ended up changing everything. It was the night of the junior-senior awards ceremony at my high school. I'd just been named one of the top students in the district. There was a scholarship involved. Small, but it meant the world to me. I stood on the stage, hot lights on my face, clutching the thin folder they'd handed me. In the sea of parents and siblings, I scanned the rows for my family. I'd left the house with Mom's promise echoing in my ears. "We'll be there, honey. Wouldn't miss it for the world." I found them eventually. Not in the front rows with the other proud parents, but in the very back. Dad was scrolling his phone. Mom was watching Ethan, who had his head tilted, bored. Neither of them clapped when my name was read. They only looked up when the girl next to me's family stood and shouted. After the ceremony, kids clustered together, taking photos with their parents, balloons bobbing above their heads. I walked toward my family, heart pounding with stupid, naive hope. Maybe they'd hug me. Maybe Dad would finally say he was proud of me. "Hey," I said, a little breathless. "Did you hear? They said I have a good shot at—" "We heard," Dad cut in. "It's nice, Daniel, but remember, grades don't pay the bills in the real world. You need to think practical. We can't bankroll you forever." "We're going to take Ethan for ice cream," Mom added quickly. "He sat through that whole thing for you. That was a lot to ask of him." I stood there in my itchy dress shirt, scholarship folder damp in my hand, watching them walk away. On the drive home alone that night, the question I'd tried to bury for years clawed its way back to the surface. Am I really theirs? I started quietly collecting information after that. Not like a detective in a movie, just small, pathetic things. I asked Mom once, casually, if she had any baby pictures of me in the hospital. "Oh, honey, that was so long ago," she said, not looking up from the TV. "We weren't as big on photos back then." I remembered the fat photo album full of Ethan's first bath, Ethan's first bottle, Ethan's hospital bracelet close-up. The lie sat between us, heavy and obvious. I checked my birth certificate. It had their names on it. But I'd seen enough true crime shows to know that could be forged or amended or any number of things. I thought about asking my grandparents, but both sets were gone by then. The only extended family I saw regularly were aunts and uncles at holidays, and they always went stiff whenever the subject of my baby years came up. So I did what I always did. I pushed it down and told myself to survive the next year, then the next. I got into a good state university on scholarships and part-time jobs. When I told my parents the acceptance letter had come, Dad grunted from the recliner without looking away from the game. "That's good," he said. "Just don't pick something useless like art history. And don't expect us to foot the bill. We've got to think about Ethan's future too." "Of course," I said. I didn't remind him that I hadn't asked them for a dime. College was the first time I'd ever been somewhere I wasn't constantly compared to Ethan. For 4 years, I breathed easier. I made friends who liked me for me, professors who knew my name and encouraged my questions. For the first time, I felt normal, wanted. I thought maybe, as I got older, things with my parents would soften, that the distance was just some weird phase, that they'd see I was successful, stable, worth loving. Then the call came. I was 24, working my first real job at an accounting firm, when Mom called me one Tuesday evening. I remember because I was microwaving leftover lasagna in my tiny apartment, watching the plate spin in the yellow light. "Hey, Mom," I answered, tucking the phone between my shoulder and ear. "Daniel, your father and I want you to come over Sunday," she said. Her voice was tight, formal. "We need to talk about some family matters." My stomach dipped. "Is everything okay? Is it about Ethan?" "No," she said quickly. "Just be here at 3. Please don't be late." The line went dead. All week, my mind spun. Were they sick? Selling the business? Getting divorced? I rehearsed worried questions in my head, imagined worst-case scenarios. None of those scenarios were what actually happened. Sunday afternoon, the house looked the same from the outside. Same peeling yellow paint, same dying shrubs clinging to life near the porch. Inside, though, the air felt off. Too still. They were both waiting at the dining table when I walked in. No snacks on the counter, no football game murmuring from the living room. Just my parents, 2 coffee mugs, and a single manila folder between them. "Sit down, Daniel," Dad said. I sat. My hands were suddenly too big, too clumsy in my lap. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Mom cleared her throat, glanced at Dad, then at the folder. "We've been talking," she began, picking at a stain on the tablecloth. "About the future, about our legacy." A chill crawled up my spine. "Okay," I said slowly. "Is everything all right with the business?" "The business is fine," Dad snapped. "This is about the family." He rested his hand on the folder, fingers splayed. For once, he looked directly at me. There was no warmth in his gaze, just a clinical determination, like he'd finally decided to cut a bad branch off a tree. "Daniel," he said, "you're old enough to handle this now. There's something we've kept from you for a long time." My mouth went dry. The room closed in a little. My childhood suspicion, that old quiet voice that had whispered to me in the dark for years, suddenly roared back to life. "You're adopted," he said. The words landed with a dull thud. Mom flinched, then forced a brittle smile. "What your father means is, you're not our biological child. We took you in when you were a baby. We didn't want you to feel different, so we never said anything." For a second, my brain refused to process it. I stared at them, at the coffee mugs, at the folder, at the crooked picture frame on the wall. The house seemed to tilt. "What?" I managed, though I'd heard them perfectly. "We're not your real parents," Dad said, voice flattening the way it did when he talked about budgets. "Not by blood, anyway. We raised you, we fed you, we did our duty, but we don't want any confusion about rights going forward." My skin went cold and hot at once. There it was, the part that mattered. "Rights," I echoed. "What does that mean?" Dad opened the folder. Inside were some printed pages, maybe a will, maybe drafts. He didn't bring them all the way to my side of the table. He just let me glimpse the legal letterhead. "It means," he said slowly, as if talking to a difficult client, "that when we're gone, the business, the house, the assets, they'll go to Ethan. He's our son, our heir. Well, we'll make sure you're not left on the street, but it wouldn't be fair to treat you the same. Blood is blood." Mom's eyes shone with tears she didn't wipe. "We hope you can understand," she whispered. "We're being honest with you now. We don't want hard feelings later." My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted out. For a heartbeat, all I could hear was that one night, years ago in the kitchen. "He's not like Ethan. He doesn't fit. He's not ours." "You kept this from me my whole life," I said. My voice sounded calm to my own ears, eerily distant. And the first time you tell me, it's to let me know I'm not part of the will. Mom winced. Dad's jaw hardened. Don't make this about money, he said. We gave you a good life. We didn't have to. You should be grateful. Grateful. The word exploded in my chest. 100 small humiliations rushed back. The birthdays, the he's not like us comments, the way they used responsible and serious as code for we can neglect him and he won't complain. And now this. Who are my real parents, I asked. The question came out sharper than I intended. Do you have any information, names, anything? They exchanged a look. It was a fleeting, guilty flicker, but I saw it. We don't have those records, Mom said too quickly. It was a closed adoption. We were just told you needed a home. We gave you one. That should be enough. My gut twisted. Something about the way she said it, the way Dad didn't jump in with details, made every alarm bell in my body go off. But they sat there, calm, resolute, like they'd rehearsed this speech. And Ethan? I asked. He knows? Of course he knows he's our biological son, Dad said. He deserves to know what's his. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. The sound made all three of us flinch. I need air, I said, because if I stayed in that room one more second, I was going to shatter. Don't be dramatic, Daniel, Dad called after me. We thought you'd take this more maturely. I stumbled out onto the front porch, the late afternoon sun a slap of light. The maple tree rustled in the breeze. Across the street, Mr. Jenkins was mowing his lawn, oblivious. Inside, the only world I'd ever known had just cracked down the middle. Adopted. Not theirs. Not blood. Cut out. The words spun around me like flies. For the first time in a long time, I realized something with bone-deep clarity. I might not know who I truly belonged to yet, but I knew, without a doubt, who I didn't belong to anymore. I stood on that porch for a long time, staring at the street like it might give me answers my parents never would. I don't remember how I got back to my apartment that night. I must have driven, obviously, but all I can recall is the feeling of my hands on the steering wheel, cold, slick with sweat, and my brain running in circles. You're adopted. You're not ours. Blood is blood. By the time I collapsed on my couch, the sun had gone down. The shadows in my living room looked warped, wrong. For a minute, I thought I might throw up. Then something in me just went silent. The next few weeks were a blur. At work, I functioned like a robot. I smiled when I was supposed to, nodded in meetings, went through spreadsheets until the numbers blurred. At night, I lay awake replaying every moment of my childhood, trying to see it through this new lens. It explained so much. Their distance, their preferences, the subtle way I'd always been the other one. And yet, if I was really adopted, why didn't it feel like the whole truth? Why did their story sound like something they'd pulled off a script, polished and flat? Why were there no documents, no names, no agency? Why had they waited until there was a will to change? The more I thought about it, the more my shock hardened into something else. Not just hurt, suspicion. I tried to talk to Ethan about it once. We met up at a bar near his college. He was a junior then, broad-shouldered and comfortable in his own skin in a way I'd never been allowed to be. You serious? He asked when I told him what they'd said. He took a swig of beer, frowning. They finally told you? Finally? I echoed. You knew? He shrugged, eyes darting away. They told me a couple years ago, said I was old enough to understand. He squinted at me. Look, man, it doesn't have to be a big deal. Lots of people are adopted. I stared at him. Did they ever actually show you anything? Papers? Anything from an agency? He shifted on his stool. No. Why would they? I mean, it makes sense, right? You don't look like them. You're different. He said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. My chest tightened. You don't think it's weird they waited until now, that they told me in the same breath as, by the way, you're not in the will? Ethan rolled his eyes. Not everything is about money, Daniel. Dad just wants to keep the business in the bloodline. You always knew he wanted me to take it over. Why are you acting surprised now? Because I'd been stupid enough to hope they'd love me anyway, I thought. Out loud, I said, so you're okay with this, with them cutting me out? He shrugged again, but there was a flicker of something like guilt in his eyes. It was gone almost instantly. It's their call. It's their stuff. We didn't exactly grow up struggling, you know. You got plenty out of them. Yeah, I said slowly. I got plenty. He clapped me on the shoulder, clearly done with the conversation. Look, if you want some help later on, I'll see what I can do. Maybe slip you something on the side. Don't make this weird, okay? Something inside me snapped at that. Not loud, not spectacular, just a quiet, clean break. I won't make it weird, I said. My voice sounded strangely calm to my own ears. You enjoy the bloodline. I left him there with his beer and his easy shoulder shrug and walked out into the night. After that, I stopped going home for holidays. At first, my parents called, pressed, guilt-tripped. Mom left voicemails about keeping the family together. Dad texted me links to articles about forgiving your parents. Eventually, the calls spaced out, then stopped. On Christmas that first year, I sat alone in my apartment with takeout Chinese and a cheap string of lights around the window. I thought it would crush me not to be there, not to hear the same tired arguments about politics over dry turkey. Instead, I felt relieved, lonely, sure, but lighter, too, like I'd stepped out from under a heavy, invisible hand. I threw myself into work. If I couldn't belong to a family, maybe I could at least belong somewhere. My career took off in a quietly solid way. I became the guy people trusted with boring but crucial projects. I paid off my student loans. I moved into a slightly better apartment where the radiators didn't clank all night. I started running to clear my head, pounding my anger and confusion into the pavement until my lungs burned. But no matter how far I got from that yellow house, the question kept following me. Who am I, really? I tried going through official channels. I requested my original birth certificate from Vital Records, only to be told what I already knew. My amended certificate listed Gary and Linda Marshall as my parents. No other record was visible to me without proof of adoption, which of course I didn't have. I asked a lawyer friend about digging further. He frowned, rubbed his jaw, and said, if there was a private adoption and they went through a lawyer instead of an agency, it might not be in any obvious system. It'd be expensive and messy to push. You sure you want to go down that road? I thought about my bank account. I thought about years of lawsuits, about dragging myself through courts trying to prove something my parents could clear up with a single honest conversation. No, I said, not like that. There was another option, though, one that felt both ridiculous and oddly right. DNA. It started small. A commercial came on between segments of some bland cooking show I was half watching. Happy people spitting in little plastic tubes, smiling at maps of their ancestry. Find out who you really are, the narrator said in that soothing voice. I ordered a kit the same night. When it arrived, I sat staring at the white box for a long time before finally opening it. Spit, seal, send. Easy. Clinical. Strangely intimate. The results took weeks in which I told myself this was stupid, that the best this kit could do was tell me I was 30% something and 40% something else. Weeks in which I opened the app at least once a day to see if there were any updates. One Tuesday morning, an email popped up. Your results are ready. I sat at my desk, heart pounding harder than it had in any board meeting, and clicked. There it was, a colorful wheel of percentages, a list of regions. None of that interested me as much as the next tab. DNA relatives. When I clicked it, a list populated. Third cousins, fourth cousins, people with profile pictures in cities I'd never been to, and then near the top, a name that made my breath catch. Emily Carter, predicted relationship, first cousin. I clicked her profile. Grew up in Ohio, age 35. One of her listed family surnames was Marshall. For a second, all the air seemed to leave the room. I wasn't sure what I'd expected. Maybe a confirmation that I was some complete outsider, some floating piece with no matches at all. But a first cousin in a system that only showed you so much without consent? That meant someone very close to my supposed adoptive family shared enough DNA with me to light up the algorithm. I messaged her through the app, fingers trembling. Hey, Emily, weird question. Are you related to any Marshalls in Ohio? An hour later, she replied. Hi, Daniel. Yep, my mom's maiden name is Marshall. Her brother Gary still lives there, I think. Are you from that side? The floor dropped out from under me. Gary, my father's name. I stared at the screen, the words swimming. Then, very calmly, I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked into the office bathroom. I locked myself in a stall and sat on the closed toilet lid, head in my hands, heart pounding so hard it made my vision pulse. If I was truly adopted, if Gary and Linda had taken in some random baby from some unknown place, why did I match one of Gary's nieces as a first cousin? You share about 12–14% of your DNA with a biological first cousin. That's what the little info box on the app said. You share 50% with each parent. In that moment, I didn't need fancy percentages to tell me the obvious. Whatever story my parents had told me, it wasn't the truth. I didn't tell them I knew. Not yet. Instead, I gathered information. Emily and I messaged back and forth. She was chatty, friendly, the kind of person who used a lot of exclamation points. She told me about her mom, Carol, who was Gary's younger sister, about their childhood in Ohio, about big, noisy Marshall family reunions at a lake house owned by their parents. "I'm surprised we've never met," she wrote at one point. "Mom always said Gary had 2 boys, Daniel and Ethan. Maybe I just don't remember you. You should come to the reunion this year." My hands froze on the keyboard. Reunion. I hadn't seen most of my extended family since I was a teenager. After I left for college and then stopped coming home for holidays, the invitations dried up. Mom always said, "It's just for the immediate family, honey," or "They're doing it somewhere far this year and you're so busy," when I asked about relatives. Now here was a first cousin I didn't even remember, cheerfully inviting me back into a circle I'd been silently cut out of. "Where is it?" I typed, trying to sound casual. She sent back a flyer, a PDF, bright and over-designed, with the words Marshall Carter Family Reunion splashed across the top. A big photo of a lakeside lodge I vaguely recognized. Date, late summer. Time, all weekend. Underneath, a line that made my eyes narrow. "Let's celebrate our roots. Optional. Bring your DNA results and family tree if you have them." I almost laughed out loud in the silent office bathroom. The irony was obscene. I closed my eyes and saw my parents at the table, saw the manila folder, heard Dad's flat voice. "You're adopted. Blood is blood. Blood is blood. You okay in there, man?" Someone called from the other stall. I started, realizing I'd been sitting in that cramped space for nearly 20 minutes. "Yeah," I croaked. "Just bad sushi." He laughed and left. I stayed where I was a little longer, the plan forming in my mind. I'd always thought revenge would look big and loud, screaming matches, slammed doors, lawsuits. What came to me then was something else. Colder, sharper. They believed they controlled the story. They believed they could define me out of existence with a sentence. They believed that saying "you're adopted" was enough to erase any claim I had, not just to their money, but to their name. They thought no one would ever check, no one in the family, certainly not quiet, responsible Daniel. But now I had proof whispered back to me from their own bloodline, and there was going to be a room, soon, full of that bloodline. A weekend where everyone who'd ever looked away while I was edged out would be gathered in one place. I didn't have to scream. I just had to hold up the truth and let it speak louder than their lies. In the months leading up to the reunion, I did my homework. I printed out my DNA report, highlighted the shared segments with Emily, paid extra for a more detailed breakdown that estimated shared DNA with unknown relatives at ranges that lined up almost exactly with aunts, uncles, grandparents. I signed up for another service just to cross-check. It matched me with more Marshalls and Carters, names I recognized from old Christmas cards, people who, according to my parents, had no biological tie to me at all. I messaged a few cautiously. "Hey, I think we're related." The responses were warm, confused, welcoming. No one questioned it. No one said, "Oh, you must be adopted." Carla, another cousin, wrote, "Mom says she remembers you. You were the quiet one with those big eyes. She always wondered what happened to you. It'll be so good to see you again." Quiet one with big eyes. I could almost see that kid, half in the frame, half out. At night, my anger burned hot. During the day, I let it cool into something more useful. I started talking to a therapist, a woman named Renee, with kind eyes and an unflinching way of asking questions that went right to the core. "You're talking a lot about proving them wrong," she said one session, leaning back in her chair. "About revenge. What are you hoping to get out of that, Daniel?" I stared at my hands. I want them to feel what I felt. I want them to be small, exposed. I want everyone else to see them the way I see them now. "And do you think that will make you feel like you belong? More real?" I hesitated. It was a fair question. "No," I said finally. I don't think anything they do or say now can really give me that. But I'm so tired of their version of reality being the only one anyone hears. Renee nodded slowly. So maybe this isn't about getting their love anymore. Maybe it's about taking your story back. Is there a difference? I asked, half bitter, half genuine. Yes, she said. One depends on them changing, the other doesn't. Those words lodged in my mind. As I booked my flight to the reunion, as I took a few days off work, as I bought a simple but sharp outfit that made me feel like myself, not the ghost of their disappointment, I thought about that difference. I wasn't going there to beg. I was going there to tell the truth. The weekend of the reunion dawned hot and bright. The lake house sat at the edge of a wide, glassy lake, pine trees crowding close behind it. Cars lined the long gravel driveway, license plates from half a dozen states flashing in the sun. As I pulled in, my hands were steady on the steering wheel. My heart was not. It climbed into my throat when I saw the clusters of people on the lawn, kids running with plastic cups, older relatives in folding chairs, the smoke of a grill curling into the sky. I hadn't been back to this place since I was maybe 15. Back then, I'd spent most of my time inside, hiding in a corner with a book, while Ethan cannonballed off the dock to Cheers. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, watching. A woman with short, curly hair and laugh lines I recognized from her profile picture turned and squinted toward the car. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God," she said, hand flying to her chest. "You must be Daniel." I got out of the car, forcing a smile that, to my surprise, didn't feel entirely fake. "Emily?" She barreled toward me and pulled me into a hug that smelled like sunscreen and potato salad. "Look at you," she said, pushing me back to arm's length. "You've got Grandpa Marshall's nose, I swear." Mom, he's here." A woman with gray streaks in her hair and kind eyes turned from the grill. She peered at me, then let out a soft noise somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. "Danny?" she said. "Little Danny?" "Aunt Carol," I said before I could stop myself. The words slipped out easily, like it had been waiting all these years. She came over and hugged me too, not the stiff, dutiful kind of hug I was used to, but a full, rib-squeezing embrace. When she let go, her eyes were shiny. "We thought you didn't want anything to do with us," she said. "Linda always said you were too busy to come. I should have called. I'm sorry, sweetheart." Heat pricked the back of my neck. My throat tightened. "Yeah," I managed. "I've been around." Before I could say more, another car pulled in, a familiar one. That dent in the bumper, that faded college sticker. Gary and Linda Marshall stepped out as if they owned the ground they walked on. My parents, they looked almost exactly the same. Dad a little grayer, Mom a little softer around the edges. They were laughing at something Ethan had said as he climbed out of the back seat, tall and sure of himself, sunglasses perched on his head. Then Dad's laughter died mid-sound. He saw me. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost comical. Mom froze with the picnic blanket in her arms. Ethan lowered his sunglasses, his eyes narrowing. For a split second the scene held. Birds chirped. Someone shouted for a kid to slow down. The smell of burgers on the grill drifted by, and in the middle of it 4 people stared at each other across 20 years of lies. "Daniel," Mom said finally, her voice high and thin, we didn't know you were coming." Aunt Carol glanced between us, confusion creasing her forehead. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Of course he's coming. He's Gary's oldest. Where else would he be?" Dad recovered fast. He was always good at that. "Well," he said, forcing a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "Isn't this a surprise? We'll have to catch up later, son." The word son sounded like it had gravel in it. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Later." I shored up my smile, let myself be swept into conversations with relatives I barely remembered, with kids who had no idea about the silent war already crackling under the surface of this sunny afternoon. All the while, I could feel my parents' eyes on me, like a weight between my shoulder blades. Emily tugged me toward a long table under a canopy where someone had set up a family heritage display. There were old photo albums, framed pictures of ancestors, a handmade tree drawn on a poster board with branches labeled Marshall and Carter. At the end of the table sat a cardboard box with several unopened DNA kits piled inside. "Isn't this fun?" she said, digging around in the box. "Aunt Carol thought it would be cool if everyone who hasn't already done it gets a kit. Then we can fill in the tree properly. You already did yours, right?" Yeah, I said, my hand brushing the papers folded carefully in my pocket. I did mine. Perfect, Emily chirped. We'll update all the matches later. You and I are a really close match, by the way. Mom thinks you and I must share a lot of those Carter genes. She laughed, oblivious. Behind her, I saw my father watching, arms crossed, jaw clenched. My mother whispered something to him, her eyes darting between me and the DNA kits. The afternoon wore on. We ate. We played the obligatory sack races and tug of war. Cousins traded stories about childhood mishaps I half remembered. The time someone fell off the dock, the time the grill caught fire. In all of them, Ethan was the main character. In 2 or 3, I was a blurry figure in the background, someone only recalled because I'd been the one to get the adults. As the sun slid lower, someone suggested we all gather for sharing time. Updates, memories, funny stories. The kids groaned, the elders clapped, and folded chairs appeared like magic. I sat near the front, my heart steady now. In my pocket, my DNA reports felt like a living thing. My parents took seats near the center, their posture stiff. Ethan lounged next to them, one ankle propped on his knee, every inch the heir apparent. The light caught the expensive watch on his wrist. I wondered briefly if it was a gift from Dad. I wondered if he'd worn it on purpose. Aunt Carol stood, clapped for quiet, and smiled. All right, everyone, she said, her voice warm. Before we end the day with the bonfire, I thought it would be nice for anyone who wants to share a memory, a story, whatever. And since we're doing this heritage thing, if you've done one of those fancy DNA tests and discovered anything cool, feel free to share that too. There was laughter, some good-natured groans. A couple of cousins shared stories about finding unexpected Irish ancestry or discovering they were more Scandinavian than they thought. It was light, funny, my heart beat faster. My palms were dry, not sweaty. I took that as a good sign. Finally, Aunt Carol glanced toward me. Danny, she said, we haven't heard from you in so long. Got any stories? I stood, feeling dozens of pairs of eyes turned toward me. For a second, the old instinct to shrink, to apologize for existing, rose up. Then I saw my father's face, composed but tight, the muscle jumping in his cheek. I saw my mother's fingers clenched white around the arm of her chair. I saw Ethan's bored, mildly amused expression, as if he were watching some low-budget show. And I remembered Renee's voice. Maybe this isn't about getting their love anymore. Maybe it's about taking your story back. Actually, I said, reaching into my pocket, I do have something to share. The papers crackled as I unfolded them. The late afternoon light slanted through the trees, bathing the circle in a golden glow that felt almost like a spotlight. This is my DNA report, I said. Some of you already know because we matched online. It says I'm related to a lot of you, first cousins, second cousins, aunts, uncles. It's kind of wild, honestly. There was a chuckle or two. Emily beamed. See? I told you we were really close, I nodded. You did. I let my gaze travel around the circle, forward, landing briefly on each face. Finally, I fixed it on the 2 people who'd once told me blood was everything. And it also says I'm 50% related to one of you, I said calmly. Actually, to 2 of you, which is interesting because a few years ago I was told I was just adopted, that I wasn't really blood, that I didn't have any right to this family beyond their charity. A hush fell over the group like a dropped blanket. Someone shifted in their chair. A kid whispered, "What does he mean?" and was shushed. My father's face went very, very still. In that charged, breathless silence, I realized something. Whatever power he'd once had over my sense of self, it was gone. I held the papers up a little higher. And according to this, I said, my voice steady, that was a lie. For a moment, nobody moved. A breeze shifted through the pines, rattling leaves. Somewhere behind us, a kid dropped a plastic cup, the hollow clatter unnaturally loud in the silence. My father's knuckles were white on the armrests of his folding chair. My mother's lips had parted slightly, like she'd forgotten to finish breathing. Ethan had taken off his sunglasses completely now, eyes fixed on me, his mouth a flat, hard line. I took a slow breath, felt my own heartbeat steady, and continued. I did this test months ago, I said, holding the report so it caught the light. At first, I just wanted to know where I came from. My parents. I flicked my eyes toward them, told me I was adopted, that they had no records, no names, no agency, that there was no way to know who my biological family was. A murmur rippled through the circle. Aunt Carol turned her head sharply toward my father. Her brows drew together. I thought it was the truth, I went on. I thought, okay, that explains why I never really fit, why I looked different, why I was other. I let my gaze drift across the cousins, the aunts, the uncles, but then I spit in a tube and mailed it off. A few weeks later, it told me I shared more than 12% of my DNA with Emily. I nodded toward her. She sat frozen, eyes huge, hands clenched around a paper plate. And with Carla, I added, pointing toward another cousin who looked equally stunned. And with a whole bunch of you, Marshall, Carter, over and over. I shifted the papers to my other hand and pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumb moved almost automatically to the app. And it also told me, I said quietly, that I share 50% of my DNA with someone in this circle, which is exactly what you'd expect if that person was my biological parent. I swiped and turned the phone so the screen was visible to the closest row. Colored bars, percentages. A big clear label, parent-child relationship, 50% shared DNA. This match, I said, my voice clear now, is with a user named Linda M57. Gasps, definitely gasps this time. Heads whipped toward my mother. She made a small, strangled sound. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes darted from the phone to my face, to the papers, to the box of unused DNA kits like a trapped animal. That's not, she started, then faltered. And here, I said, swiping again, is another parent-child match, 50%, with a user named Gary M60. Same platform, different company, cross-checked. I wanted to be sure. I let that hang in the air. The silence was heavy, thick. You could almost hear the gears grinding in half a dozen heads at once as the relatives started putting the pieces together. Dad's face had gone the color of old paper. A vein throbbed at his temple. Those stupid websites don't know what they're talking about, he snapped. They're junk, entertainment, no court in the world. Those stupid websites match me with your sister's kids as first cousins, I cut in, my voice sharper now. I gestured toward Aunt Carol and Aunt Lynette. They match me with your parents' siblings' grandkids. They match me with the exact people I would match if I were your biological son. Both of you. I turned toward the circle so my parents weren't the only ones I was talking to anymore. I believed them, I said. When they told me I was adopted, I swallowed it. I made peace with it, because I thought at least they were finally being honest. At least that part made sense. I looked back at my father, at the tightly controlled fury in his eyes. But it wasn't the truth, I said. The truth is, they lied. And from where I'm standing, it looks a lot less like some noble, painful confession about my origins, and a lot more like a very convenient way to justify cutting me out. Someone cleared their throat. It was Uncle Tom, my dad's older cousin, the one who'd always seemed slightly apart from the rest, watching more than talking. Cut you out of what? He asked slowly. I gave a humorless laugh. The will, I said. The business, everything. A few years ago, they called me over, sat me down at the dining table, and told me I was just adopted. Those were his exact words. I nodded at my father. They said Ethan would get the house, the company, the assets because he was their blood, and I should be grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. Every word tasted metallic in my mouth. Saying it out loud in front of all these people made the memory feel both more real and less suffocating. Aunt Carol's face had gone through a whole slideshow of emotions in the last 2 minutes. Shock, confusion, something dangerously close to anger. Now she turned fully toward my parents. Gary, she said quietly. Is that true? My father straightened, jaw tightening. I saw the old defensiveness flare, the one that had shut me down 1,000 times as a kid. This is a private family matter, he said. I don't know why Daniel thinks it's appropriate to drag it out here like a circus. I'm talking to you as your family, Aunt Carol replied, her voice still soft but edged with steel I hadn't heard before. Your son, your biological son, clearly, just said you told him he was adopted to justify cutting him out of your will. That's not a private matter, Gary. That's wrong. Mom finally found her voice. It came out thin and cracking. We were trying to protect Ethan, she stammered. It's complicated. You don't understand. Oh, I think we understand just fine, another aunt muttered. Ethan stood up, fists clenched at his sides. This is ridiculous, he snapped. Dan, what the hell are you doing? Trying to humiliate Mom and Dad in front of everybody? Over money? The word money hung in the air like a bad smell. I stared at him, at the flush creeping up his neck, at the watch glinting on his wrist. For a split second, the old desire to appease him kicked in. To say it's not like that, to try to smooth things over. Then I thought about sitting at that table, hands shaking, hearing I was just adopted. I thought about him in that bar, rolling his eyes, telling me not everything was about money while he happily accepted being the sole heir. It's not about the money, I said, and for the first time I realized it was actually true. It's about what they made it mean. They didn't just say, "We're leaving the business to Ethan." They could have said that without inventing some entire story about me not being theirs. I shifted my gaze back to my parents. You didn't have to tell me I wasn't your real son. You chose those words. You chose that lie. And you used it to justify treating me like I was less for years. Dad's lips curled. You always were sensitive, he muttered. And you always were a coward. I shot back before I could stop myself. The sentence came out low and razor sharp. A murmur rippled around the circle, half shock, half something else. Approval? I didn't dare assume. He surged halfway out of his chair. For a second I thought he might actually swing at me, right there in front of everyone. Mom grabbed his arm, hissing, "Gary, don't," under her breath. "You think you're something now?" he spat. "Waving papers around, you ungrateful little—" "Don't," Aunt Carol said sharply. It was the first time I'd ever heard anyone in the family cut him off like that. "Do not talk to him like that." He glared at her, chest heaving. She held his gaze, unflinching. Years of older sister energy poured off her in waves. "This is not how we were raised," she said. "We do not cast kids aside because they're inconvenient to our plans. We do not lie to them about who they are. Mom and Dad would be rolling in their graves." Mom flinched at that, a visible jerk of the shoulders. Tears finally spilled over and tracked down her cheeks. "We were scared," she whispered. Gary was scared. The business, things were tight for a while. He kept saying, "We can't split it. We can't split it. It has to go to one person or it'll fall apart." And Ethan, she looked at my brother helplessly. Ethan always wanted it. He was the one who wanted to be involved. You never seemed to want any of it, Daniel. You had your school, your thoughts. I almost laughed. My thoughts. As if that had been some quaint little quirk instead of the only part of me they hadn't managed to stomp flat. "So it was easier," I said slowly, "to decide I wasn't yours, to tell yourselves I was some extra, some kid you took in, to turn me into a charity case so you didn't have to feel guilty for what you were doing." She opened her mouth, closed it again. Dad yanked his arm free from her grasp and stood all the way up, the folding chair clattering behind him. "We didn't turn you into anything," he snapped. "We made you. We fed you. We put a roof over your head. We didn't have to." "Yes, you did," Aunt Carol shot back. "He's your son. That's the bare minimum, Gary, not sainthood." "This is enough," he barked. "I'm not going to stand here and be ganged up on at my own family reunion because Daniel is throwing a tantrum and waving around some internet results." I took a breath, forced my shoulders down. I wasn't going to match his volume. I'd spent my whole life bending around his moods. I wasn't going to do it now. "This isn't a tantrum," I said quietly. "It's a boundary." He snorted. "Big word." "Yeah," I said. "One I learned away from you." I turned slightly, addressing the circle again instead of just the two of them. "I didn't come here to beg for a place in their will," I said. "I didn't come here to claw for scraps of a business I was never allowed to touch. I came here because for 30-plus years, one story has been told about who I am, the serious one, the sensitive one, the one who didn't fit, then when it suited them, the adopted one, the not really ours one." I held up the papers, then slowly folded them, tucking them back into my pocket. "But this," I tapped my chest gently, "this says otherwise. My blood says otherwise. My bones say otherwise. And frankly, my life says otherwise." I glanced at Ethan. He looked almost ill now, his confidence knocked sideways. Good. Maybe for the first time in his life, he was having to see our parents as something other than infallible. "For years," I continued, "I starved myself for their approval. I twisted myself into knots trying to be their kind of son. Straight A's, quiet, useful, grateful, and nothing was ever enough. Because the problem was never me. I looked at my parents steadily. The problem was how small your love was." Mom let out a sob at that. Dad's face twisted. He opened his mouth to say something, but I raised a hand. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I lied, just a little. I'm saying it because I need all of you to hear it, because I'm done carrying it alone. I took a breath, feeling my throat thicken and then clear. I don't want your business, I said, turning back to Dad. I don't want your house. I make my own money. I built a life without your help. What I do want is for everyone here to know that whatever story you spin from now on to justify what you did to me, there is another version. The one where I am, in fact, your firstborn, your eldest son, and you lied. The word hung in the air, heavier than all the others. You lied to me. You lied about me. You lied to this whole family. For a long heartbeat, no one spoke. Even the kids on the fringes seemed to sense something powerful was unfolding. Then Aunt Lynette, who'd always been the quietest of Dad's siblings, stood up slowly. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was firm. Is it true? She asked, looking straight at him. Did you tell him he was adopted when he's not? Dad bristled. We told him he wasn't fully ours, he hedged. Linda had a scare early on in the pregnancy. The doctors said, Gary, Mom whispered, horrified. Don't, please. He rounded on her. Well, what do you want me to say, Linda? He shouted. That I panicked? That when I thought we might lose Ethan, I decided the business couldn't be split? That I started thinking of Daniel as less so it would be easier? The words blasted out of him like a confession he hadn't meant to give. The instant they were in the air, you could see him wish he could stuff them back in. The collective intake of breath from the circle was almost physical. He was a difficult baby, Dad went on, almost frantically now, as if explanation could soften it. You all remember, always crying, never smiling. Ethan was easy. He just fit. We did what we had to. I did what I had to. You all act like you'd have done differently, but you don't know. You don't know what it's like to build something from nothing and realize you could lose it all if you split it wrong. One wrong move, and you decided the wrong move was loving both your kids equally? Aunt Carol snapped. Are you listening to yourself? He glared at her. This is exactly why I wanted to keep it quiet. You all sitting on your high horses. We're not on high horses, Uncle Tom said quietly. We just didn't throw our own children under the bus to make bookkeeping easier. Dad's mouth opened and closed. Mom had her face in her hands now, shoulders shaking. The strange thing was, as ugly as it was, listening to him rationalize himself somehow broke something loose in me. For the first time, he sounded smaller than the monster he'd been in my head. Petty, fearful, pathetic, almost. He wasn't some all-powerful judge. He was just a deeply flawed man who'd made a coward's choice and then doubled down on it for decades. I felt something in my chest unclench. I don't expect you to suddenly become different people, I said. My voice was softer now, not because I was backing down, but because the rage was ebbing, leaving something clearer behind. You've built your whole lives on these stories, on favoritism, on scarcity, on pretending there wasn't enough love to go around. I looked at Ethan. You too. He swallowed, looking away. But I'm done letting that shape who I am, I continued. I came here to say this out loud, in front of the people who share my blood and the ones who choose to share my life, because I want to draw a line. I straightened, the words forming more easily now, like my mouth finally knew the shape of them. I don't want anything you're not willing to give freely, I said. Not love, not money, not names on a piece of paper. If your condition for acknowledging me as your son is that it costs you nothing, then we're done. I turned to the circle again. I'm choosing something else, a different way to be family, with people who see me, who don't need me to disappear to make room for their favorite. I let my eyes meet Aunt Carol's, then Aunt Lynette's, then the cousins who'd reached out to me with genuine warmth. If that includes some of you, I added, I'd like that. If it doesn't, I'll survive. I already have. I reached into my pocket one last time, not for the DNA report, but for a smaller folded paper. My hand was steady as I unfolded it. I also want to be absolutely clear about this, I said, my voice flattening a little. This was the cold edge of the plan I'd been sharpening for months. A few years back, when you told me I was just adopted, I recorded the conversation. Dad's head snapped up. Mom's hands dropped from her face. Ethan's eyes went wide. Not because I planned some elaborate scheme, I went on. Because I didn't trust myself not to think I was crazy later. I needed proof. On that recording, you tell me I'm not your biological child. You tell me that's why you're removing me from your will. Now I have 2 independent DNA tests that say that was a lie." I paused, letting that sink in. "I've already talked to a lawyer," I said calmly. "It turns out, intentionally misrepresenting a biological child as non-biological to cut them out of an inheritance can count as fraud in a lot of jurisdictions, especially if you do it in writing later, especially if there's a pattern of behavior to support it." A low, impressed whistle came from somewhere in the back. Uncle Tom, maybe. I didn't look to check. "I'm not saying this because I want your company, Dad," I said, eyes locked on his. "I'm saying it because you made me into something I wasn't to make yourself feel better. You turned me into an adoptee when I wasn't one, because then you could tell yourself you weren't really discarding your own flesh and blood. That story made it easier for you. It made it hell for me." I took a step closer, not threatening, but very, very clear. "So here's how this goes," I said quietly. "If, when you die, there's a will that pretends I'm not your biological son, I will contest it. I will bring the recordings. I will bring the DNA. I will bring every relative here who's heard you admit what you just admitted. If that means the business gets tied up in court and Ethan's golden inheritance gets delayed or shrunk because of legal fees, that's on you, not me." I heard Ethan sucking a breath at that, like I'd slapped him. "Or," I added, "you can be honest from now on. You can write whatever will you want without relying on lies about who I am. If you still decide to give Ethan everything, that's your call. It'll be ugly. People will see it for what it is, but at least it'll be the truth. And I won't spend the rest of my life wondering if I was crazy for feeling what I felt." He stared at me, breathing hard. His eyes darted around the circle, taking in the faces he'd spent his whole life trying to impress. Aunt Carol's fury, Uncle Tom's disappointment, Emily's wide-eyed horror, even Ethan's rattled expression. For the first time in my life, I watched shame sink into him. "You little bastard," he whispered. It didn't land the way it used to. It just sounded tired. "I'm not little anymore," I said, and to my own surprise, there was no venom in it. Just a simple statement of fact. Silence stretched. A bird called from the trees. A breeze rifled the edges of the family tree poster behind us, making the drawn branches flutter. Finally, Aunt Carol broke it. "Danny," she said softly, "whatever your parents do or don't do from here on, you're one of us. You always were. I'm sorry we weren't there to see what was going on. I'm sorry we believed the too busy story. That's on us." I swallowed hard, my throat thick. "Thank you," I managed. The words felt like a gentle hand on a bruise. "I remember you as a quiet, sweet kid," she went on, "sitting in the corner with a book while the rest tore up the yard. I always thought, he's just shy, he'll come to us when he's ready. I didn't realize what you were walking back into when you went home." She turned to my parents, her voice sharpening. "You should be ashamed." Mom sobbed harder. Dad looked away. One by one, a few other relatives spoke up. Little apologies, little acknowledgments. Not enough to erase the years, but enough to put some weight on the other side of the scale. I hadn't expected that part. I'd come here, ready to set fire to the old story and walk away into the smoke. I hadn't considered the possibility that anything good might rise from the ashes. Eventually, Aunt Carol clapped her hands, sniffed, and said, "All right, I think that's enough heavy for one afternoon. The burgers are getting cold, and the kids are getting restless. We can yell more later." She gave me a small, wry smile. "Danny, you sit with us. I want to hear everything you've been up to." She looped her arm through mine like it was the most natural thing in the world and steered me toward the picnic tables. A few cousins drifted over, asking about my job, my city, my hobbies, not probing, just curious. Behind us, I heard my parents' voices in low, heated whispers. Ethan's sharper, higher tone cut through once or twice. I didn't turn around. For the rest of the evening, I let myself lean into the warmth where it existed. I watched little kids with martial eyes and Carter dimples run around the lake. I listened to old stories that didn't rewrite me out of them. I laughed, a little surprised each time the sound came out of me. When the sun slipped behind the trees and someone lit the bonfire, I stepped away from the circle for a moment, standing at the edge of the dock. The lake was turning a deep, smoky blue. Reflections of fire danced on the surface. Footsteps creaked on the old planks behind me. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. "Hell of a show," Ethan said, coming to stand beside me. His voice was strained, the usual easy confidence gone. "Wasn't for show," I said. He huffed. "You threatened to blow up the entire inheritance." "No," I corrected calmly. I pointed out that Dad's lie could have legal consequences. Big difference. He was quiet for a beat, then let out a bitter laugh. "He's furious with you," he said. "He's furious with me too. Says I should have kept you in line." "That tracks," I said. I slipped my hands into my pockets, feeling the folded papers there like a heartbeat. He can stay furious. That's between him and whatever mirror he can still look in. Ethan shifted his weight. In the flickering firelight, he suddenly looked younger, more like the kid who'd fallen off the maple tree and screamed for Dad, while I stood at the bottom too scared to touch him because I'd been told I was clumsy. "Did you mean it?" he asked quietly. "When you said you didn't want anything?" I thought about it. Really thought. "I meant I don't need anything," I said slowly. "I've been fine without their support for a long time. If all this," I waved a hand vaguely toward the house, the cars, the legacy, "burned down tomorrow, my life would look pretty much the same." He was silent so long I wondered if he'd walk away. Instead, he sighed. "I always knew they treated you different," he said. "I just didn't want to see how bad it was. It was easier to pretend you were just moody, that you liked being by yourself, that we were all fine." "Must have been nice," I said, not unkindly. He flinched. "For what it's worth," he offered. "I never asked them to cut you out. I would have been fine sharing." I looked at him, at the earnest squint in his eyes, at the guilt that sat on his shoulders like a new, ill-fitting coat. "For what it's worth," I said, "what hurt me wasn't you getting more. It was them needing me to be less to justify it." He nodded slowly, staring down at the black water. "You really recorded that conversation?" he asked after a minute. I smiled faintly. "Yeah." He let out a low whistle. "Damn, you're colder than I thought." "I'm just done being the only one without receipts," I said. We stood there in silence for a while, the crackle of the bonfire behind us, the soft slap of water against the dock. "You know," he said eventually, "if he does fix the will, share things fairly, that's because of you. Not because he suddenly grew a conscience." "I know," I said. "And if he doesn't, and it all gets messy, that's on him too. I'm not going to contort myself around his choices anymore." He nodded, then cleared his throat awkwardly. "So," he ventured, "is there any chance I mean, you and me? I know I've been a jerk, a blind jerk. But—" I let him hang there for a second, feeling the old instinct to grab whatever scraps of affection were on offer. Then I remembered the little boy half out of frame, the teenager clapping for himself quietly in the back row of an auditorium. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm open to seeing who you are when you're not propped up on our parents' pedestal. That's all I can promise right now." He looked at me, then nodded. "That's fair." He hesitated, then gave me a small, crooked smile. "For what it's worth, you did good back there." "Thanks," I said. "Took me 33 years to say 10 minutes worth of sentences, but I'll take it." He snorted, then nudged my shoulder lightly. "Come back to the fire," he said. "Emily's about to dig out the ancient karaoke machine. You know you can't pass up hearing Aunt Lynn butchering Sweet Caroline." I laughed, surprised at how easily it came. God, I forgot about that. We walked back toward the circle together, not as brothers healed, but as two men who'd finally looked at the same wound in the light. As the night wore on, I sang badly, laughed with cousins, listened to stories about relatives in other states I'd never met. Every now and then, my eyes drifted to where my parents sat on the far edge of the circle, diminished, closed in, talking to no one. There was a time that sight would have cracked me in half with guilt. Now, I felt something closer to distance. Sadness, yes, but not obligation. Near midnight, I slipped away to my car. The sky was black velvet dotted with stars. The air smelled like smoke and lake water and summer grass. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, and let the silence sink in. I thought about the kid who'd poured a glass of water in the dark and overheard his parents talking about him like he was a mistake. I thought about the young man hunched over a scholarship letter, craving a "we're proud of you" that never came. I thought about the older version of me sitting across from them as they said, "You're just adopted," believing, for one nauseating moment, That meant I'd imagined every resemblance, every shared habit, every gut-level sense that something more complicated was going on. He hadn't been crazy. He'd just been lied to. The revenge I'd imagined years ago had fire and brimstone in it, utter destruction, ruin, watching them lose everything. The revenge I'd actually executed looked different. It was standing in front of them with proof they couldn't shout down. It was pulling their story out into the open air and letting it wilt under the eyes of people who'd always believed they were better than this. It was drawing a boundary they couldn't redraw for me. And maybe most importantly, it was choosing a life that wasn't built around their absence. When I pulled out of that driveway, gravel crunching under my tires, I didn't feel triumph so much as a deep, bone-level release. Like I was finally driving away from a house that had been condemned years ago. I just hadn't seen the sign. Back home, in my small but bright apartment, I pinned the printed family tree Aunt Carol had given me on my wall. Marshall Carter. My name was there now, written in her looping cursive between my parents, a line connecting me firmly to the rest. I didn't hang it because I suddenly believed blood was everything. I hung it because it was a reminder that their attempt to write me out hadn't worked. Not really. I kept going to therapy. I kept going to work. I called Emily sometimes to laugh about distant cousins' drama. Aunt Carol sent me recipes and old photos she dug up from boxes in her attic. One of them was that baby picture from the hospital I'd always wanted to see. In it, my mother is young, hair mussed, face flushed with that mix of exhaustion and awe new parents wear. She's holding me, tiny, red, eyes screwed shut. My father stands beside her, a little awkward but smiling, really smiling, at me. I stared at that photo for a long time the first night she sent it, at the way his hand is resting on the edge of the bassinet, at the way he's angled toward us. They hadn't always seen me as less, I realized. They'd made that decision later, piece by piece, chip by chip, every time they chose fear and favoritism over courage and fairness. And that weirdly helped too, because it meant there was nothing fundamentally wrong with me that had made them incapable of loving me. They'd had it once, they'd put it down, that was on them. A few months after the reunion, I got a manila envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of a recent will draft. My father's handwriting in the margins, typed lines dividing assets between our sons, Daniel Marshall and Ethan Marshall. There was no note, no apology, just the document. I sat at my kitchen table, the late afternoon light slanting across the wood, and stared at it. Then I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, a real one this time. They'd fixed the paperwork. They'd protected themselves legally. They'd given me what I'd asked for in front of everyone, the truth, on paper. I put the will draft in a folder, filed it in my cabinet, and went back to my life. Whether or not I ever saw a dime from them when they died was almost irrelevant now. The real inheritance I'd taken was my own damn name back. If there's anything I've learned through all of this, it's this. People will tell you who you are so they don't have to look at who they are. They will call you sensitive because they are scared of feelings. They will call you ungrateful because they don't want to face what they did. They will call you just adopted, not really ours, not one of us, because it's easier than admitting they chose one child over another. For a long time, I swallowed those labels whole. Let them shape my bones. Now when I feel that old voice rise up, you don't belong, you're extra, you're not really part of this, I think of standing in that circle by the lake with firelight on my face and papers in my hand, saying out loud, no. That's not the story anymore. I think of Aunt Carol's arm through mine, of Emily's delighted "you've got Grandpa's nose," of the line on the poster board where my name sits, ink dried, not erasable. And I remember that in the end, the most powerful revenge wasn't watching my parents squirm. It was refusing to let their shame define what I deserved. They tried to make my entire existence conditional on their generosity. In the end, I showed them the one thing they could never take away. I was here. I am theirs. And I get to choose what that means from now on.